Checking the contents of your X-Pole Sport case. Before unpacking the X-Pole Sport case, or starting any assembly, it is important to fully read the manual. To open the bag, just pull on the Velcro panels. On the inside of the case is a layout chart, which shows where each item is stored. Take out each pole carefully by releasing the straps and sliding out of the pocket. Note how they are fixed into place, as you will reverse this process when you have finished using your pole. To get the X-pole joints and extensions out of the pockets, just push up with your fingers to ease them out of the pockets. The top and bottom plates have their own pockets to secure them. Finally, there are two tools needed to assemble your X-pole, which are located to the side of the pocket. Now let's check you have everything. Starting with the A pole, this is the heart of the sport pole. The B pole, this will be fixed to the A pole. One X-joint already inside a 125mm extension piece. A separate X-joint to join the A and B pole. A longer 250mm extension also with the X-joint in place. The articulating base and the upper plate. One 6mm hex key and one tightening and release tool. And finally, tucked inside the extension tube, some foam padding, used if required to cover the extended adjuster thread. The sport pole is static only. This completes the content check and you are ready to start the assembly. Measuring the height of the ceiling and calculating the pole size required. Before assembling your X-pole, you will need to know your exact ceiling height. To do this, you need a step ladder and a tape measure and the assistance of another person standing on the bottom of the ladder for support. Using the tape measure, measure the distance from the ground to the ceiling. Make sure the tape is vertical and taut. And then remember or write down the measurement for future reference. Using that measurement and the X-pole height chart, check to see if you need any extensions. For a ceiling between 2,235 and 2,375mm, you do not need any extensions. You will need an articulated base. On A pole, an X-joint, a B pole, and an upper plate. For a ceiling between 2,360 and 2,500mm, you need a single 125mm extension. To assemble your pole, you will need a base, an A pole, an X-joint, a B pole, another X-joint, the 125mm extension, and an upper plate. For a ceiling between 2,485 and 2,620mm, you will need one single 250mm extension. To assemble your pole, you will need a base, an A pole, an X-joint, a B pole, another X-joint, the 250mm extension, and an upper plate. For a ceiling between 2,610 and 2,745mm, you will need both the 250mm extension and the 125mm extension. To assemble your pole, you will need a base, an A pole, an X-joint, a B pole, another X-joint, the 250mm extension, another X-joint, the 125mm extension, and an upper plate. Remember, the smallest extension always goes at the top. Locating ceiling joists. Your X-pole needs to be installed under a secure location, like a solid or concrete ceiling, a metal girder supported ceiling, or a ceiling using wooden joists. Your X-pole must be directly under a joist to be secured firmly. Using step ladders and someone standing on the bottom of the ladders, you can find the joists by either using a stud finder or tapping along the ceiling using your knuckle. A hollow sound will be between the joists and a solid sound under the joist. Mark where the joist is so you can find it later for the installation. Finding a suitable exercise and dance area. Using your mark on the ceiling, showing the joist location, place a chair under this spot. Now, with fully extended arms, walk around the chair to see if there is enough area to use your pole. If there is anything obstructing the area, then move it away to a safe distance. This area, now created, will enable you to fully extend your arms and legs when using your X-pole. How the X-joint works. X-joints are used to securely join poles and extensions together. On the side of the X-joint are two hex screw holes, used to contract or expand the X-joint. To expand the X-joint, the 6mm hex key is inserted into the screw hole. It is important to push the key firmly until it is seated in the screw hole before winding. To expand the X-joint, wind the hex key clockwise. To contract the X-joint, so you can insert it or remove it from a pole, wind the key anti-clockwise. Alternate between the two screws so the X-joint can contract evenly. To insert the X-joint into a pole or extension, align the key on the X-joint. This is between the two screw holes, and slot the X-joint into the key slot located on the pole. Now add the next pole or extension and line up the key slot in the same way. Make sure the two parts close together fully before using the hex key to expand the X-joint. To expand and secure the X-joint, wind the hex key clockwise. It is important to alternate between both screws while tightening to ensure the X-joint expands evenly. When no further force can be applied to the screws with the hex key, the X-joint is secure. Connecting the A pole to the B pole using an X-joint. Taking your A pole and noting the hole in the pole, start the assembly by lining up the X-joint screw hole with the screw hole in the pole. Once you start sliding the X-joint into the pole, line up the key with the U keyway slot located in the pole. Then line up the other pole and slot it in the same way. Now push the poles together, making sure there is no gap. Taking the 6mm hex key and insert it into the key hole. Remember to push the hex key firmly into the socket. Don't forget to alternate between the screw holes so the X-joint expands evenly. Once no further force can be applied to the screws, the pole is secure. Adding extensions. Before adding any extension to your pole, refer to the X-pole height chart to see if you need any extensions. To add an extension to the B pole, first take an X-joint and line up the X-joint screw hole with the hole in the B pole. Slide the X-joint into the pole so it lines up with the screw hole and the key lines up with the U keyway slot in the pole. Now add the extension and again line it up with the hole in the pole and the X-joint screw hole and slide the extension on. Make sure the key lines up and then push the poles together, making sure there is no gap. Now take the 6mm hex key, the one with the grip, and insert it into the key hole. Remember to push the hex key firmly into the socket. Turn the hex key clockwise and expand the X-joint, alternating between the screw holes so the X-joint expands evenly. Now take the 180mm X joint. This is for the 125mm extension. The correct X joint will have an arrow mark. This should always point up towards the top of the pole. Line up with the screw hole in the X joint and the hole in the B pole and slide it. Twist it slightly if needed to align. The screw hole should be visible and the key situated in the U keyway slot. Now to add the final 125mm extension. Now just line up the extension hole with the X joint screw hole and slide into position. Align the key and U keyway and push firmly together. Finally, expand the X joint evenly until tight with the 6mm hex key. You are now ready to put on the base. Attaching the upper plate. Once the A pole and B pole and any extensions have been assembled, insert the top plate into the pole. Make sure the two keys on the upper plate locate with U keyway slots on the pole tube. Just slide the plate in and you are ready to put on the base plate. Attaching the base. The X-Pole Sport is always assembled on the floor first, and then lifted and installed in position after assembly. The articulated base has an integral rotating mechanism, and this is where the threaded A-pole adjuster fits with a locking nut. This locking nut, you must unscrew a small amount clockwise to release the adjuster thread. Now with it loose, you can adjust the thread in or out. Note there is a hole in each, and this is where the tightening and release tool will fit once the pole is upright in position. Now the locking nut is loose, you can fit the articulated base onto the A-pole adjuster. And you are now ready to install the sport pole. Installing the sport pole. Having assembled your pole, it should be lifted into position, but it is mandatory that this is done with 2 people, as the pole is heavy and at full height not easy to handle. 2 people should lift it into place with the pole base at the center point of your dance area. Use the ceiling mark where you located the joist and position the base plate under this mark. 1 person should hold the base while the other raises it vertically into position. Once vertical, the person at the base should insert the tightening tool. This goes all the way through the adjuster until the black ring seats against the adjuster. Wind it clockwise to raise it to the ceiling. Be careful to ensure the upper plate is flat against the ceiling and under the joist mark. Once in position and holding the pole to stop it rotating, tighten the adjuster by rotating it clockwise until positive pressure is felt, and then the pole is firmly in place. Rock the pole to ensure it does not move from its position. Carry on until secure. Finally, tighten the locking nut anti-clockwise until firm. This is the most important part, to ensure that the adjuster screw does not become unfastened during use. Once tight, you can cover the adjuster screw with a supplied foam cover. Work out the amount you need to use and then cut it to size with a sharp knife. Once cut, open the foam tube and slip it over the adjuster screw and push into place. Now you are ready to test the pole. Testing your X pole. Before using your pole, just check that all the X joints are tight and that the pole is secure against the ceiling. If the pole is firm, you are ready to use your pole. Now test the pole with a basic exercise. You are now ready to use your pole.